This segment, Elise Labott, longtime veteran foreign affairs journalist, now teaching at Georgetown in the Master of Science in Foreign Service program. You've seen her for 20 years on CNN. And I wanted to talk to Elise because I don't think many American journalists have noted the sequence of speeches given by Ambassador O'Brien, FBI Director Wray, yesterday by Attorney General Barr, and next week at the Nixon Library, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. All four of those speeches about the Chinese Communist Party. That doesn't happen by accident. Elise, welcome. Good to have you.
Good to be with you, Hugh.
Have you ever seen four speeches delivered by four senior administration officials about the Chinese Communist Party as hard hitting or even remotely as hard hitting in a row like this?
I don't think so, Hugh. I think it's pretty unprecedented, and you can see that this is shaping up to be one of the big issues, at least for President Trump, in terms of the upcoming campaign, presidential campaign, that this is really an issue about the U.S. and China, and it's across the board, right? But I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now is that the U.S. is really hitting China for Chinese hackers moving to target U.S. pharmaceutical and research companies on these vaccines. And you see that Russia has been doing it. Over the last couple of days, we've been talking about that. But really what the U.S. is concerned about is that China is really the big threat in terms of, our intellectual property for many years, but now because of the coronavirus.
Now, 2 weeks ago, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates was on this show, Elise Labott. And you can follow Elise, by the way, at Twitter, Elise, Elise. I have to spell it out for the Steelers fan, Elise. Elise Labott with two T's at the end. And Secretary
It's
Gates said,
actually Labott. It's actually Labott, but
you let
it's
me
okay.
go through our entire trip to Israel and Turkey together with John Bolton. I called you the wrong pronunciation and you never said anything?
That's okay, but I wasn't going to let you go the whole segment saying it.
All right, Elise Labott. So Elise and I, we go back a way. We've traveled the world with John Bolton together. But I wanted to say, 2 weeks ago, Bob Gates said we're in Cold War 2.0. And Elise, that is a significant declaration from a significant man. Has that dawned on most of the people that you work with, talk with, associate with as a veteran foreign affairs journalist?
I really don't think so. I think there's this big kind of ambiguous idea that China is a threat or China is bad. But also I think there's a feeling maybe that it's a little bit of sour grapes because China seems to be this rising power at a time that many would argue that the U.S. is a declining power. I think the Chinese pose a very big threat to the U.S. way of life, to our intellectual property. Obviously, there are issues in the South China Sea and such, but, some of the things that really bother me are more about how they're doing influence operations here in the United States, their human rights violations against Uyghurs and others. I mean, this is not a country that is espousing U.S. values and U.S. principles.
There is a leaked satellite imagery. I don't know where it came from, of the Uyghurs being boarded onto trains headed off to their camps, bound and gagged and in long, long rows that is circulating on Twitter this morning. And the Uyghur concentration camps is beginning to break through as the repression of Hong Kong has broken through, as have the claims in the South China Sea. But I think, Elise, you're too young to really have grown up with Cold War.
Oh, bless you, Hugh.
Oh, you are. I'm 64. We grew up with the Cold War.
Right.
And Vietnam, and then all the Reagan until the wall came down. But from 1989 until very recently, a generation has been educated in the idea that the end of history, Francis Fukuyama, it's all coming together. It's not all coming together. It's coming head to head between the CCP and the U.S., with Russia and Iran as kind of, agents of influence of the CCP. But it really is West versus East now.
It is West versus East, and you see China, whereas before it would kind of, do its foreign policy that often was, against U.S. foreign policy in a very quiet, covert way. Now you see China being much more bold And you even see diplomats. We've talked a lot about these diplomatic warriors that are going off and really speaking against the United States. And you've seen this, I wouldn't even call it a Cold War. I'd call it a kind of open war of rhetoric when you saw China blaming, after President Trump really started hitting China for its actions on the coronavirus, started saying that the U.S. brought the virus to China. And it's not
Yes.
just the U.S. China is really hitting back against anybody that criticizes them. Diplomats Chinese diplomats around the world have taken a much more aggressive stance to countries that criticize them.
Yeah. Now, journalism is a lagging indicator of what's going on in the world. It always has been. They're always a step behind. And this is I want to talk to you as a veteran foreign affairs journalist. I don't think our media is ready for this, largely because it's a harder country to understand. It's a language inaccessible to most large media organizations. There aren't a lot of people who've done other than go to the Great Wall and snap photographs or zip around Hong Kong and go up on the gondola. I just don't think our media is ready for China in a adversarial way, Elise. Labott, what do you think?
I think that's true. And also, look, some of the things that China is doing, I think, are also very complex issues. Like if you look at the China Belt and Road Initiative, where China is making deals with all of these countries, kind of trying to recreate the Belt Road from the old days. What they're doing is, entering relationships with these countries, hurting their economies in some ways. Like, there are issues where they're building projects or they're building infrastructure, but, China is really kind of putting these countries at a disadvantage in a lot of these ways. But that's really threatening the U.S. economic prowess around the world, and not in a good way, because, China doesn't have the same conditions with human rights or labor or helping those countries be sustainable. In a lot of ways, they're kind of taking from these countries, even as they're creating.
Of course, yeah, they're communists. Yesterday, Michael Oren, the longtime ambassador of Israel to the United States, said on this show that the $400 billion deal that the Chinese Communist Party entered into with the mullahs of Iran is a game changer that nobody noticed in the Middle East. It just gave a lifeline to the mullahs who were struggling. And it really declares that the CCP is on the side of the Shia theocrats.
I don't think that they're on the side of Shia bureaucrats. I think they're on the side of whatever gives them a short-term gain and a short-term advantage. I don't think they have, the U.S. won't go into deals, or U.S. won't deal with countries in a lot of instances economically that don't meet certain standards and certain principles. With China, there are no standards and there are no principles. I'll deal with anybody who's going to give me a leg up.
Well, I think I think the Middle Kingdom's view is we are the Middle Kingdom, and everybody else is 1 degree removed from us, and we don't care what Iran does or what their ambitions are.
Exactly. That's why I don't think they're on their side. I think they're on their own side.
They're definitely not on our side.
Yeah,
and the enemy of our enemy is our enemy.
Exactly. Definitely not on the U.S. side. I mean, look, there isn't one area of foreign policy that the U.S. and China don't touch one another, and I think we need to find a modus operandi for working with China.
It's gonna, next week,
Secretary
Pompeo's coming to the Nixon Library next week to give the 50th anniversary of Kissinger's secret diplomacy mission speech. I don't expect it will be high-fiving that relationship. And so here we are. Last question, Elise. Is American journalism ready for a new Cold War? I think not.
I don't think so, not only because of the complexities of China, but also because American journalism has gone for, much more simple, much more easier ways of kind of defining a topic, which are more about personalities and more about, personal and political dynamics. And China doesn't lend itself to that.
Agree 100%. Follow Elise on Twitter, Elise Labott. Thank you. Labott, I'm sorry. I've been doing that. You never told me when we traveled together. It's not my fault. Elise Labott, thank you.